Is the law against blasphemy in Indonesia being misused? The Christian governor of Jakarta denies insulting Islam. His trial is causing nationwide anger, but is the court case politically motivated? And what does it mean for Indonesian cultural equality? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. Indonesia's blasphemy law isn't new, nor is it secret. For years, rights groups have accused the country for using the law to persecute religious minorities. But for the first time, it's being used against a high-ranking politician. The governor of Jakarta, Basuki Cahaya Purnama, known as Ahok, has gone on trial. He denies insulting the Quran during a campaign speech, but faces 5 years in jail if he's convicted. His trial is raising questions about the fairness of the blasphemy law and about religious freedom in general. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Step Vassen reports from the court in the capital.
Hundreds of protesters chanted outside court. Inside, their screams, "Jail Ahok" and "Death to the governor" could be heard.
I'm Muslim and I'm here to make sure that the Chinese infidel Ahok will be convicted today for blasphemy. For us Muslim, there is no other option. If not, then we will start a revolution.
Reading the indictment, prosecutors said the Christian governor deliberately made a blasphemous statement during a public event in September. Ahok then questioned the use of a Quranic verse by his political opponents that Muslims can't be governed by non-Muslims. An emotional Ahok told the court that he would never insult Islam because that would mean he would insult his own Muslim godparents.
I am very sad that I was accused of insulting Islam because the accusation is like saying I despise my adoptive parents.
These demonstrators want Ahok to be detained and eventually convicted. Amidst these continuous protests, many are wondering if the court can withstand all this pressure and give the governor a fair trial.
10 days ago, hundreds of thousands protested against Ahok in one of the largest rallies Indonesia has ever seen. The blasphemy law dates from 1965, but has increasingly been used in the past 10 years, with at least 130 convictions since then, mostly of people belonging to religious minorities.
So it is going to be another setback for Indonesia that has been going on over the last 10 years. Indonesia is going to be more and more intolerant toward minorities. Indonesia is going to be more and more discriminating against minorities.
Ahok supporters, many of them Muslims, but also some of the minority groups, gathered outside court to stress Indonesia has a multi-religious and multi-ethnic character.
Ahok is very honest. He is clean, and I know Ahok has always been good to Muslims. He protects and supports the Muslim community.
Ahok has gained popularity in Jakarta for his anti-corruption policies, his measures to reduce flooding and for building new roads. But since the blasphemy charges, his popularity ratings have fallen. His supporters blame political opponents for stirring up resentment during his election campaign for governor. His trial will continue next week. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, Jakarta.
Let's take a closer look at the world's largest Muslim nation. Around 90% of 250 million Indonesians are Muslim. The other minorities are mainly Christian and Hindu. There are around 15 main ethnic groups and many more smaller ones, and more than 700 Indonesian languages. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Jakarta, Philim Kain. He is Deputy Director of the Asia Division at Human Rights Watch. From Singapore, we have Charlotte Sidiadi from the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. And lastly, from Jakarta, we have Zain Adnan, who is a lawyer. Welcome to you all. Let me start by asking Mr. Kain this. Mr. Kain, what is this whole story about? Is it someone who has been misunderstood or someone who crossed red lines in a multi-ethnic country?
I think the singular lesson of Ahok's plight is that a very bad law, the blasphemy law, the law number 156A in the Indonesian Criminal Code, should have been repealed a long time ago. And the fact that it hasn't is continuing to cause all kinds of problems and is continuing to be a tool or a cudgel by powerful forces to target mostly minorities, specifically religious minorities. So this is a singular lesson that when a bad law is left in place, it will be exploited and abused. And that's what happened in the case of Ahok. Ahok made a reference to a Quranic verse about that states that non-Muslims should not be leaders of Muslim majority places. And he has been accused by militant Islamists, particularly a group known as the Islamic Defenders Front, or the FPI, of defaming the Quran. And that has brought about this series of events in which he is now being targeted with this abusive blasphemy law.
Charlotte, Ahok is a rising star in Indonesia. Do you think that this is a character assassination under the disguise of blasphemy?
I certainly think there's a large element of that. Since the beginning of his political career, Ahok started off as a local politician. He started off as a local legislator for his home region of East Belitung, which is quite a small region in East Sumatra. And then he went on to become the regent of East Belitung, and then before he entered the national stage, and then eventually to become the governor of Jakarta. He has always been known for being quite a blunt, quite a tough-talking and quick-acting politician. And throughout his career, he has upset many people. He has alienated many political opponents, and he has collected many enemies for himself. So this blasphemy allegation and all the case, the complexity surrounding it now can be seen as part of a personal attack towards Ahok and to eventually kill his political career.
Let me bring in Zain Adnan. Mr. Zain, how do you explain that just for quoting a verse in the Quran, thousands and thousands of people would take to the streets denouncing the man as insulting the religion?
Yes. For Ahok to say things about the Quran when he is actually not a Muslim, for many Muslims it's hurtful because he is a public official. Public officials in Indonesia do not usually comment on religions of their people. And for me, I'm an intellectual property attorney. My job is to get foreign investment into Indonesia. We want peaceful transitions of power. And now that we have Ahok saying these things during not his campaign, it wasn't even it wasn't the campaign date yet. It was before the election officials.
Yes, Mr. Adnan, if you want investors to pour into Indonesia, at the same time you have to honor their legacy, which is basically combining democracy with Islam. So why would you just be upset with someone who quoted a verse? This is not someone who insulted religious symbols. I mean, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with quoting a verse.
Yeah, he quoted the verse, but he is not in a position to quote the verse because he's not a Muslim. He is a Christian minority. He's a Chinese Christian. And his track record was very good until that point when he pointed out, said this verse, and as a Muslim, I had to look up this verse because it's been a long time since I've looked at this verse, and I read the whole surah, and I've asked the Muslim Ulama Council regarding this surah and what it means to Muslims, and it has caused unrest.
Okay.
I don't think it's character assassination because
I see your point.
he has
so basically,
been since the beginning. he has been blunt since the beginning of his career.
I get your point.
So,
let me bring in Kaim. Mr. Kaim, there are different layers to this story. Because
so I think the point I take the other guest's point in that, but I think that we need to discern between and differentiate between hurt feelings and a legitimate basis for criminal liability, and that's the problem with the blasphemy law. This law is dangerously ambiguous, and what it states is that anyone who by word or committing of an act that that expresses contempt, hatred, or hostility to one of the 6 protected religions in Indonesia can be held liable under the blasphemy law. So it's dangerously ambiguous in terms of what that means and how it can be interpreted. And the second thing is that this law historically has been used by the majority to target the rights and to restrict the rights of minorities, specifically religious minorities. This law has a dishonorable, abusive provenance. It was a product of the dictator Suharto's time. It was passed at the pressure of religious Islamic conservatives. And so if you look at the timeline and the history of this law, it has been used over the decades to silence, intimidate, harass, and imprison overwhelmingly religious minorities in Indonesia. It's been a tool, a cudgel of abuse, and I think we're seeing that play out here again.
Okay. Charlotte, do you think that the main reason Ahok is facing trial is basically his Chinese background, given the general anti-Chinese sentiment among Muslims in Indonesia?
I think it's certainly a factor, and but if we look at the chronology and also the main reasons as to why this blasphemy allegation and this entire issue came to begin with, it was not because of Ahok's ethnicity or because of his race. It started off as a religious issue. It is still largely a religious issue now, and you know, the very fact that Ahok himself is ethnic Chinese became a component, another factor that weighs down and is a liability for Ahok. Although this case started off as a religious issue, and it still is, of course, a blasphemy investigation, the very fact that the Chineseness aspect of it, that his Chineseness is time and time again attacked by political opponents. And if we look as well at some of the discourse surrounding this case and also some of the hateful speech during the demonstrations and also in social media, etc., attacking his Chineseness really tells us that anti-Chinese sentiment in Indonesia is still alive and well. But having said that, it needs to be remembered that it is a factor in this entire saga. And really, you know, you asked me the question before whether this is a character assassination or not. In reality, this is a very complex issue. There are many layers to it. Yes, character assassination is, in my opinion, certainly an aspect of it. It is also about the blasphemy law, as
we will talk in detail about.
But also at the end. Yep.
We will talk in detail about the blasphemy law later.
But I'd just like to, I think it's important.
Briefly, please, Mr. Kaim.
I question the idea that Ahok's Chinese ethnic identity and his identity as a Christian is not part of this. I think it is the elephant in the room. And I think it's important to take a look at the timeline of events. That the group that sought to file charges, that laid the initial complaint with the police, were elements of the Islamic Defenders Front, it's a militant Islamist group implicated in multiple acts of violence against religious minorities over the years. And in 2014, when Ahok took over from now President Jokowi as Jakarta governor, it was the Islamic Defenders Front that launched a mass campaign to disqualify Ahok as a candidate for mayor based on the fact that he was a Christian. So there is a history in terms of his his religious identity in this complaint of blasphemy.
Let me bring this argument to Zain Adnan. Zain, aren't you concerned that those who took to the streets might be manipulated by groups like the IDF just to further promote their own or advance their own agendas?
I am concerned. I am concerned that the people who went down to the streets in Jakarta 3 times, may I add, were some of them were manipulated to go there, but others flew in and they came on their own volition. I have friends who are attorneys. I have friends who are vice presidents of multinational companies. They, Indosat Oredo, they provided food, they provided, they came because they were concerned that this would be a violent demonstration, and it wasn't. It was a peaceful demonstration. Muslims saw that this was a peaceful demonstration, and under Indonesia's constitution, it's allowed. So we see Muslims against Muslims, and that's very interesting because the police questioned ulamas, and they have detained ulamas, and they have asked other ulamas in the Muslim Ulama Council to provide witness during police questioning, and it's concerning because it's affecting the economy.
I see your point. I see your point, Mr. Zain. Indonesia is one of many countries where blasphemy is a crime. 52 countries, that's about a quarter of the world total, have blasphemy laws. The most common in the Middle East and North Africa, where 18 of the region's 20 countries criminalize blasphemy. So do a quarter of all countries in the Asia-Pacific region, notably Pakistan and Bangladesh. Blasphemy is also outlawed in 7 European countries, as do almost a third of nations in the Americas, mostly in the Caribbean. Blasphemy laws are at least common in sub-Saharan Africa. Only 4 out of 48 countries there ban criticism of religion. Let me go back to Mr. Kine. Do you think that the blasphemy laws should be overhauled or totally scrapped in Indonesia?
Oh, the blasphemy law should be repealed. It should be trashed. It belongs in the dustbin of history. For a country which aspires to be a country of unity and diversity and true religious pluralism, this is a dangerous anachronism which still poses and plays a very toxic role in Indonesia today. It's important to note that this law is the foundation for numerous other parts of legal infrastructure in Indonesia which discriminates against religious minorities, including a 2008 directive law which banned any public activities by the Ahmadiyya here in Indonesia. So it's something that just doesn't belong. And the fact that it is continuing to be targeted, and it's targeted at religious minorities, it's indicative of the rising intolerance in Indonesia. And this is a rising intolerance that's directed not just at religious minorities, but also at the country's LGBT population, which has also been targeted over the past year with withering abuse from militant Islamists, including the FPI, which have led this charge against Ahok. And you know, just take a look at history. When we look at what's wrong with the blasphemy law in Indonesia, well, we know that over the last 12 years or so, 130 prosecutions have been launched. 100% conviction rate in those 130 prosecutions. And they were all launched by Muslims against religious minorities, Ahmadiyya or Shia or Christian.
Charlotte, is this a sign of rising intolerance in the Indonesian society?
Well, I think so, certainly. Continuing on from what Phelan said before, the very fact that now this blasphemy law can be used to target religious minorities, as has been seen through the many cases that preceded this one, and also to target not just religious minorities, but like LGBT community and also ethnic minorities as well. And the very fact that now in the post-Suharto era, we see laws such as the blasphemy law used much more than it was in the past, even during the Suharto era, shows that there is a rising intolerance as well. But I think it's important that we also view what is happening here in regards to rising discrimination and like the uses of things such as the blasphemy law within the greater context of Indonesian politics and also the global context as well of what is happening, particularly in regards to the discourse of Islam versus the West as well.
I would like to ask Zain Adnan this. Zain, it seems that the president faces a very delicate or tough choice here because Ahok is his ally, and therefore if he stands supporting Ahok, he could be just further seen by the masses as someone who undermines the tenets of Islam. What do you think should be next step for President of Indonesia?
I think the president has said that we should allow the rule of law to continue and see what the trial comes out with. Let me remind you that there was a minister, Harmoko, when he recited the Al-Fatiha surah, and he is a Muslim, and when he recited that surah wrong in front of the public, he was investigated by the police, and he had to apologize, and he did go through the same process as Governor Ahok did. And so I disagree that that this is just the majority going after the minority.
Let me bring this question to Kain. Zain made it quite clear this is not ruling Muslim majority targeting a minority. And there are those who also say that this law is very crucial for Indonesia, otherwise the law will be hijacked by the vigilantes who will take justice into their own hands.
Well, I mean, if only it were the fact that this law, the blasphemy law, isn't just far over proportionally targeted at religious minorities, but the fact is it is. The statistics show that it is targeted by the majority, by Muslim, Islamic, militant Islamist groups, particularly at religious minorities, including atheists. So this is a law that doesn't just stifle the rights of religious minorities and religious freedom, which is embodied in Indonesia's constitution, but it also stifles and smothers freedom of expression, freedom of association. This is a problem, and if Indonesia is really serious about walking the walk in terms of being a truly tolerant, religiously pluralistic society, this law must be trashed.
All right.
And the obligation of President Jokowi is to hasten the demise of this law, because it's nothing but trouble, and it's going to get worse before it gets better if it's just left alone. That's what we're finding out in the case of Ahok.
Let me ask Sejati this. Sejati, this is a country we have different ethnic groups. Don't you think that this is a moment to sort of raise the idea that there needs to be a constitutional reform to include or accommodate all different voices?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a dangerous precedent. What's happening now, to have somebody who's already quite as popular as Ahok prosecuted in this way, and all the attacks against him attack his religion and ethnicity, is intimidating for any aspiring politician or any aspiring ethnic or religious minority who would like to come to the fore politically or through other platforms. There should be greater constitutional protection for ethnic or religious minorities in Indonesia, and ideally, the blasphemy law. I tend to agree that that this is a dangerous law to have, but judging from how President Jokowi has reacted so far, and judging to how much the mob has dictated the conversation so far, I am not very optimistic at the chances of such protection be afforded to ethnic and religious minorities in Indonesia, at least at present.
We'll definitely keep an eye on the story as it evolves. Philim Kine, Charlotte Sitijati and Zain Adnan, thank you very much indeed for your time. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Al-Barra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.